ghosts, spirits, poltergeists, ghouls, goblins, demons, angels, supernatural entities. These are words to explain the different types of unnatural sources that haunt and roam our realm. My name is Bradley. Since I have experienced these types of entities firsthand, I believe it is time to show that experiences like this are not as uncommon as the gatekeepers want you to think. Now, whether you believe in these things or not, it doesn't mean they don't believe in you. Welcome to the other side of shadows. Welcome to another episode of the other side of shadows. Now, I have a question for you before we get started. Besides my own haunting tales of paranormal experiences, have you ever had your own? Have there been times where you would be sitting in the dark all by your lonesome and figures and voices just appear out of nowhere? Has there been a time where you were actually out with friends and experienced something so supernatural that you just couldn't explain it and was afraid to tell anyone about it? I actually have 11 stories from the website Reddit of people who have had paranormal experiences while either being at home or on vacation or just doing a normal random routine in their daily lives. And after I get through these stories that people have told about their supernatural experiences, my 8-year-old son has written me a very short ghost story that I am going to present to you as well. That's him waving back there. But before we get into the haunting tales of these people that are on the Reddit website, it is time for a paranormal experience story of my own. So when I was younger, I lived in a trailer with my cousin, and my aunt that owned the trailer lived, which she still does now, lived a whole county away with her husband. And my cousin would work third shifts. She'd work in the middle of the night, and on this particular night, there was a disastrous, cold, crisp blizzard that was roaming through our town. The snow was falling so quick and the snow was so thick that you could barely see in front of you. And usually when my cousin would go to work and I'd be at home by myself, I would curl up on the couch, turn on the TV, and just sleep there, because for some reason I just did not like sleeping in my room in this trailer all by myself. So on this particular night, as I was just getting comfy and I had a comforter over me on the couch, I was laying there watching TV, trying to find a way to fall asleep. As I was watching TV, a very creepy and eerie feeling just washed over me. Did not know why at the moment. But I could feel eyes. I could feel like someone else was there besides me, even though the trailer was supposed to be empty. As I laid there, with only the light from the TV being the only glow within that room, I looked to the right of the TV that was up against the wall, and on this wall it was just a beige color, nothing there but drywall. And in an instant, a dark figure appeared on that wall, and you could see there was no facial detail, there was no body detail, it was just an outline of the figure. But I could tell that it was a woman because of the hair. And as I laid there and I watched this figure appear, I pulled the covers over my head, hoping maybe it would go away. And then, as I laid there for a moment, praying and wishing that this apparition would just disappear, I pulled the covers back off my head. And I looked toward the wall again. And then the figure was still there. But instead of it just staying at the wall, it walked towards me. So I put the covers over my head again, wishing it would go away. I felt chills crawl up my skin, across my arms and down my back, and I was just in a free fall of terror. So after I laid there for a couple of more seconds, I decided to throw the covers off of me, grab my shoes and my jacket, and run out the door. Now I was wearing nothing but tennis shoes, shorts, a t-shirt, and a light jacket. And this was in the dead of winter. I'm pretty sure it was December, because I remember still seeing Christmas lights around town. So I ran out the door and I walked all the way from one end of town to the other to my other cousin's apartment where he lived with his wife. As I was walking, I was calling everybody, trying to tell them what was going on, but of course this was at 1 o'clock in the morning and nobody was answering. And I was just walking down the road in the blizzard, onto the snow, trying to find somewhere else to go. Finally, I guess I woke up my cousin because he called me back. He asked me what was going on, and I told him what I saw and what I had just experienced, so he told me to get my ass to his apartment and I can stay there. So as I was walking through town, like I said, I was not going to drive a car in the middle of a blizzard. I just started walking. I passed the bank and the marquee sign said it was 18 degrees. So I was walking in nothing but tennis shoes, shorts, and a light jacket with a blizzard and 18-degree weather just to get away from this ghost that had appeared as I was trying to go to sleep. And I told my cousins about it when I got to his apartment, and he told me everything's all right, just I can crash there, and he was a little freaked out about it. The next day, when I went back home, I told my aunt was there, and I told her and my cousin what I had seen. And my aunt told me, yeah, she has seen her too because she just hangs around the house. She said that my other cousin named Val actually saw this woman in the hallway once when she came over to visit, and saw her run into the room that I was actually staying in. So that's confirmation that spirit actually does exist, and my mind was not being stupid. But I did become stupid walking in 18-degree weather with a blizzard and a lot of snow. So that is my creepy tale for this episode of my paranormal experience. So now we are going to journey to a bunch of paranormal experiences people have had and have decided to tell Reddit about. And the first story, as I read through this, is called "It Wasn't a Little Girl." Now just picture in your mind what these people are going through. So it says, I was camping with my husband and his family at a small remote lake in New Mexico. There were about 10 people in our group and another group of 6 people in the next campsite. It was nighttime and both groups were doing typical activities, making s'mores, having a few drinks, and telling stories, when we all heard what sounded like a little girl yelling out for help. Neither group had children with them, but we were all positive we were hearing a little girl and decided to search the area we heard the noises from together. There was a field behind our campsites, and we all saw a very tall, pure white figure standing maybe 100 feet away from us in the field, making the noises. We all agreed this thing looked maybe 6 feet tall, skinny, and white as can be. We made our way closer to investigate, but whatever it was that we saw started backing off as we got closer, and it disappeared into the trees. All night we continued to hear a little girl calling for help as we tried to sleep. I wonder where this campsite was. So another paranormal experience somebody had is called The Walking Dead. It says, I'm a psychiatric nurse and early in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he didn't/wouldn't/couldn't talk, but there were no medical reasons as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the Deep South and joined the military when he was 19. But one night, he vanished. He was declared AWOL, and eventually he was declared missing and dead. 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into a VA hospital emergency room in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Duchesne," but that's not the real name, "and I've been dead for 10 years. Those were the last words he ever spoke. He was covered with dust, and he was wearing the same clothes he'd been reported to be wearing the night he vanished. His social security number had not been used, and he had no identification on his person. However, they were able to identify him. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man, and that whomever was claiming to be him simply could not be. They demanded not to be contacted again. Marion paced all day, every day, moving his mouth that looked like talking or muttering, but no sound came out. He had an unveering habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open, as if he were laughing heartily, but not even a breath could be heard. If I talked to him, he appeared to listen, periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. Various medications were tried, but they did not affect him either positively or negatively. Occupational therapy did nothing because Marion would just grin unless told to stay put. He'd get up and start pacing again. On my last day at the job, the last thing I saw was Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing his head back to laugh. Later, I wondered if all along I'd been dealing with a ghost. All these years later, I still don't know. That would be a very interesting thing to experience. Either the dude was just nuts, or literally she dealt with his actual spirit before he came back. Who knows? So the next story is called The Unrest Stop. It says, I was driving across country with my mom and sister when I was 16 and my sister was 20. It was late, but we were well rested still and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas and a bathroom break. So we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at the gas station, as well as a small gray car parked at the pump in front of us with 2 young men standing still outside of it. When we got there, everything felt wrong. We'd been on the road for days and seen many rest stops at night and had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went inside and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was watching the car in front of us, and the 2 men had not moved at all. Not an inch. They weren't talking. They weren't on phones. They were just standing there, still as stone. My sister and mom came running back out to the car, and when they got in, the 2 men slowly turned to look at us while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. We all saw the same thing. They had eyes dark as pitch and empty. Truly empty. Not black, not reflecting any light at all. Just a void. We sped out of there and didn't stop until we were in the next city. The worst thing about the entire experience, we couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, and we couldn't find it on Google Maps or any paper map we had. We even asked locals about the creepy gas station out on the stretch of road and got only confused looks. We've traveled on the interstate. We've traveled on that interstate since, and there is no rest stop. It'd be nice to actually experience one of these stories in detail. The next story is called It Came for Us in the Graveyard. We were driving my friend's really old beat-up Subaru through a massive graveyard. We stopped and walked down a hill and came across a little pond. There was someone sitting on a rock on the other side of the pond. The figure was all black, and we couldn't make out any features other than the fact it looked like a man who was wearing some old-style top hat. We stupidly waved and shouted, "Hi." He didn't show any acknowledgement and continued sitting still on the rock. All of a sudden, he jumped to his feet, started running to us on the water, and then vanished in thin water about halfway on the pond. My friends and I screamed and ran back to the car. The car wouldn't start, and we heard something banging on the back of the car. It wasn't a constant bang, but every few seconds or so, we'd hear it. Nobody was outside from what we could see in the dark, but something was making a noise on the car. I opened my phone and started dialing my mom to come give us a boost, but I had no service. None of us had any cell service. The next 30 minutes were spent trying to get her car started. No banging was heard afterwards, but we felt this heavy pressure around us. Finally, the car started and she hit the pedal to the metal. We sped out of the graveyard so fast. Immediately crossing the gates, all of our phones regained cell service. One thing I know for certain is that someone or something was out there, and it was not an animal or a human. It was good to see an old friend is the next story. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road, flagging me down. It turned out that it was one of the guys I had attended school with. Jim, not his name, gets in the car and we start talking. I had not seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe a little older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the VFW and have a drink. He says, "No, just take me home." Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's house, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the outskirts of town. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that is where he lived. When we reached the end of the turnoff, he said, "Just drop me here. It was good to see you again." And he walks off into the night. I go to the VFW, met some of my old classmates. We start to talk. As we are talking about who is coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked Jim up 3 miles east of town and had dropped him off. Everyone gets quiet. Even the guy singing karaoke stops and lays down the mic. My cousin goes white as his new t-shirt. "Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago. Rolled his car. We were all at his funeral," I was told. I started to feel real dizzy, and I went out to the car to take some deep breaths. There on the seat is the local newspaper, printed 8 years previous, containing Jim's obituary. I still have the paper. It's like the ghost hitchhiker. That appears on the show Supernatural, and there's many stories about the ghost hitchhikers all around the world. The next ghost story / paranormal experience is called "Hell Hath No Fury Like a Woman Scorned." That seems to be thrown around a lot lately. After we moved into our home, We were told a woman had died there at the hands of her abusive husband. She hated men. My dad would wake up with scratches all over himself, and whenever my brother was mean to my sister or I, he would have scratches on him as well. One day my brother hurt our sister. He hit her with something. When he woke up later that night, he had a horrible bloody nose. The day we moved out, my brother accidentally broke his twin's arm trying out a wrestling move. He swears that he would have died that night if it wasn't our last in the house. That was a very short one. So this is the thing about this podcast, that I do my own research on certain paranormal events and things that have happened, but it's also good to look at other people's stories and tell them on here, so that way, everybody else can get a sense of what actual supernatural things are going on or have went on, besides just me looking at information that I find on the internet, which this is information I find on the internet, but these are people telling stories of their own experiences. And next week's episode, I have a fun guest joining me who is actually a paranormal investigator, and she is going to tell us stories and things that she has experienced and done while being a paranormal investigator. So next episode, I'm not done with this one yet, but the next episode, we actually get to have someone on here who has had more experience and able to tell us more about the whole supernatural realm. So if you are a fan of this podcast and cannot wait to actually hear someone who is a professional talk about this kind of stuff, next week's episode is going to have just that. So I'm going to do a couple more of these little stories, and then I'll read my son's, and then we will get up on out of here and go do some research again. So the next title of the story is called Death Came for Him. I was standing in my parents' room, talking to my very sick dad at the time. He was dying of stage 4 esophageal cancer. That's horrible. I got the feeling something was behind me. I get that feeling too. I looked towards the doorway to the living room, and something about 4, 6, and fully black is peeking around the corner with its hands on the door frame. I ran towards it, and it slipped back around the door. When I got outside the doorway, there was nothing. My dad was completely confused when I stepped back inside the room when I tell him. People who stayed at my house in my dad's final days claim to have seen it. My mom saw the figure on multiple occasions and multiple places until he passed away. We haven't seen it since. It seems like a lot of spirits and supernatural things, such as ghosts and apparitions that appear in homes. I've seen this, but if a close family member is on the verge of death, then it seems like that's when they want to show up. I don't know what their purpose is, if it's trying to guide their way back to the other side, or if it's just because death is near and they want to come forth. I don't know. It happened a lot when I worked at the nursing home as well, and that's some more stories I can get into later on. So let's go through maybe 3 or 4 more. So the next one, titled My Mother Attracted Evil. That sounds suspicious. After my parents divorced, when I was a teenager, I lived with my mother. I experienced lots of paranormal happenings. Several times when I was reading in my bed, the room would start to feel really icy. Next, it would feel as if somebody that hated me was staring at me. When I got that feeling, I would leave the room and come back an hour later, sometimes during the day. I would see a shadow figure sneaking along my bedroom walls. Been there. Something in the flat was pretending to be my dog. I went into my room and heard a deep growl from underneath the bed. My dog wasn't capable of making a noise that deep. It sounded like either a really big dog or a man doing his best dog impersonation. Other times, my dog would whimper and pace in the room next to mine, but wouldn't come when called, as if he was afraid of something in the hallway. When I moved in with my father, the paranormal activity stopped. The next paranormal experience is called Evicted by a Ghost. Shortly after college, I got married. We immediately moved into a basement apartment because that's all that was available within our budget. This place had a poltergeist, and my wife was terrified. Whatever resided there with us made it clear, and it wanted to leave it alone. Dishes, glasses, and other items would fly off the shelf. My wife was hit several times. There was always an ominous feeling like we were being watched. At night, when we walked through the apartment in the dark, there would be insanely bright flashes of light that would illuminate the entire room. One night while we were going to bed, as soon as my wife and I walked into the bedroom, we heard a voice from nowhere say, "My name. Move." My wife looked at me. I looked at her. I said loudly, "You've got it, bud." We moved out 2 days later and stayed with family. The old lady who owned the place died a few months later, and the house was torn down. It is still an empty lot to this day, nothing but grass and tree. I still drive by it every now and again. How would you feel if a ghost was telling you to leave your house in a very obnoxious way? You know, if a ghost wants me to leave a house, all I have to do is say please, and I'd do it. But you want to throw dishes and stuff at me, I'll throw dishes back if I'm not too scared and run out the door in the blizzard and deep snow and walk to my cousin's apartment. But
it could go through the ghost.
It could. And the thing is, now the cousin that I told the story about, that lived in the apartment that I walked to, lives next door to me. So I ain't got to walk far this time. This next story is called The Death March. My dad used to work as a corrections officer at a rural prison. He drove the perimeter of the property for his entire shift, where he would check empty buildings for runaway inmates. It was generally a boring job. One night, my dad was parked on a hill reading a magazine when he started to feel a thumping in his body. He described it as a feeling you get when speakers are playing a song with really heavy bass. He put the magazine down and checked his rearview mirror where he saw someone outside the truck. He grabbed his pistol and jumped out of the truck with his weapon drawn. Outside the truck, he realized it was a procession of Native Americans walking through the truck and directly through his seat, only to disappear at the exact spot he was sitting. He said it was clear they were ghosts because many of them appeared injured. This went on for a few seconds, and then the whole procession disappeared. He called the other perimeter guy on his walkie to try to explain, and the other guy almost immediately stopped communicating. Turns out, the other guy had seen this happen before, but didn't believe in ghosts, so he wouldn't talk about it. Alright, so let's go to one more story. This is the last one off here, and then I'll read yours.
Yay.
This one's called The Demon's Room. I worked as a forensic nurse in a hospital's lockup unit. We had one older lady who swore she was being haunted and abused by a demon she would call Tiberius. So many crazy things happened while she was on the unit. We'd go into the room, do normal care, leave, and seconds later she'd start screaming bloody murder. We'd run into the room to find her looking like she'd been in a fight with a boxing champ. A bloody lip, black eye, markings all over her body. No one ever saw her doing this stuff to herself. Things would get moved around the room by themselves. At one point, she was in protective restraints because the doctor thought she was hurting herself. There was no way she could have moved or done anything to herself while in these restraints, but new marks would always appear, or her tray/cart would be across the room. The room was secure, so there was no way someone else was doing this. When we asked her questions, she'd just say it was the demon's name. After she was discharged, we always had trouble with that room. If there was going to be a rapid response or code, it happened in that room. One night guard reported lights blinking on and off, and it was that room. So that is it for all them fun paranormal experiences that people have decided to share on the internet. So it would be nice to know exactly where all these places or all these experiences happen, because I would love to do some research on that. But I mean, that should let you know that even if you are the one experiencing some paranormal events, you are not the only one actually experiencing them. So I think it'd be fun to actually talk to other people that actually do have these types of experiences, which we will on the next episode. So now, without further ado,
That's the first page.
this is my son's ghost story that he has written for me that he wanted me to share with you. What's the title? Do you have a title for it?
No.
No? Okay.
I forgot one.
So we're going to call it The Unknown.
Okay.
All right. There once was a girl that lived in a lovely house, but the house broke down and they found an old rusty
I
house.
accidentally put the A, but it's just a girl.
The little girl walked in and saw a black figure standing in the corner of the room. She ran into another room and saw the black figure in the room. It ran at her and killed her. Chapter 2, coming soon. By Colton David. But yes, that is it for this episode of The Other Side of Shadows. Thank you for coming here and listening to all them terrifying tales of paranormal experiences that people have had around the world. Next week, like I said earlier, I am actually going to have a special guest here to tell all of you about the job that she does and the experiences that she's had. And I do believe it is going to be a very fun conversation to have, because I've always wanted to talk to actual paranormal investigators to see exactly what they experience on their hunts. And her name is Amber Schultz. I met her in the TCK horror group on Facebook that I am a part of, and she is from Dalton, Georgia. And I think she said her and her husband, if I'm not mistaken, they do paranormal investigations. And so we get to have a fun experience about what actually happens when they go on these hunts. So tune in next week for a real experience. Thank you very much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions or have any experiences you would like to share and would like to be told during one of these episodes, feel free to email me at creatorsdementia@gmail.com. Let's keep the show going and let's have some fun while we're doing it and not get completely terrified at all of the creepy things that happen within this world that others choose to ignore, but most of us actually accept and experience. So until next time, stay safe and stay open. The Other Side of Shadows is brought to you by Hidden Hollow Productions. thank you for your eyes and ears as we take a look into the other side. Many unexplained occurrences are reported each and every day by the ones chosen to tell a story. If you have a story to tell, feel free to email me at creatorsdementia@gmail.com. Until next time, stay protected and stay open.